If someone had told me the wrong car could be the right start, I'd have missed it. Rain smeared the city into neon smudges and angry horns. As Harper Lane lurched out of the Monarch Hotel, mascara streaking and one heel dangling from her fingers, she couldn't bring herself to care. Her phone was dead, her coat was drenched, and her belief in humanity, particularly its female contingent, hung by a frayed thread. She'd just found her ex in a supply closet with the maid of honor. The ceremony hadn't even begun. Her Uber claimed it was 3 minutes out. But when a black car glided to the curb and idled right in front of her, Harper didn't think twice. She yanked open the back door, tossed her shoe inside, and collapsed into the seat with a heavy sigh. "Please drive," she mumbled. "I'm one bad song away from setting this whole city on fire." The woman in the driver's seat didn't move. In fact, she didn't even look over her shoulder. "You're soaking my leather," she said, her voice low and refined, like someone who didn't usually get spoken to like that. "And I don't recall signing up for arson duty today." Harper blinked, then squinted through the fogged-up window. "Wait, this is the Uber for Harper, right? Black sedan, corner of 7th and Pine." The woman turned around then, and Harper froze. She was gorgeous. No, dangerously gorgeous. High cheekbones, raven black hair tied in a sleek bun, ice blue eyes that looked like they could slice through lies and maybe small buildings. And she didn't look like an Uber driver. She looked like she owned the car, and the street, and probably the city. "You mistook me for your Uber driver," the woman said flatly. "Congratulations. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference." "That's a new one. Oh God," Harper muttered, already reaching for the door handle. "I'm sorry. I've had the worst day in the history of Where Were You Headed?" The woman interrupted. Harper hesitated. Down, anywhere not dripping in champagne and betrayal. The woman's eyes lingered on her a moment longer. Then she shifted into drive. "Buckle up. Wait, you're actually going to drive me? I'd hate for your next bad decision to involve pneumonia and a stabbing under an overpass. Consider this charity or curiosity." Harper's heart thudded. "You're not going to murder me and dump my body in a landfill, are you?" "Not tonight," the woman replied. "I'm wearing silk." Harper stared at the back of her head, stunned into silence as the city lights slid past them like melting gold. "What's your name?" she asked after a beat. "Because I'm at a disadvantage here. You've seen me at my most pathetic, and I haven't even gotten your murder alias." "Victoria," the woman said, eyes focused on the road. "Victoria Sterling." The name stirred something in Harper's brain, a distant ring she couldn't place. "Do we know each other?" "No. You look familiar. I don't make a habit of being known by people like you." Harper raised an eyebrow. "People like me." Victoria didn't answer, but Harper didn't miss the flicker in her jaw, like she regretted saying it. Silence stretched between them, thick with tension and the soft sound of the wipers. Harper shifted in her seat. "You're cold. You know that. And you're wet and barefoot in my back seat. Touche." When Victoria finally pulled up in front of a crumbling brick building downtown, Harper expected her to kick her out with a dry insult and a smug smirk. Instead, Victoria parked. "Do you live here?" she asked. Harper nodded. "Top floor. No elevator." "It's glamorous, I know." Victoria stared at the building like it offended her. "Get inside safe." "Thanks," Harper said, hesitating. "For the ride and for not murdering me." "Don't thank me yet," Harper frowned. "Why not?" Victoria finally looked at her again. Her gaze wasn't cold anymore. It was sharp, calculating, almost curious. "Because I have a feeling this isn't the last time you'll find yourself in my car." And, with that, she drove off, the tail lights vanishing into the rain. Harper stood on the sidewalk, her shoe in one hand and her heart doing something weird in her chest. Who the hell was Victoria Sterling? And why did she already want to get back in that car? Harper couldn't stop thinking about her. She barely slept, turning over in her bed as the memory of that voice, that face, that ridiculous silk blouse looped through her mind like an expensive fever dream. She didn't even know why it had gotten under her skin. Maybe it was because Victoria had looked at her like no one else ever had, like she was a puzzle missing too many pieces to be worth solving, and yet somehow still interesting. Or maybe it was just because she'd felt something in that car, something that made her want to stay that was dangerous. Harper didn't do dangerous. She did sarcasm, takeout, and a long list of romantic failures. But dangerous? Dangerous was Victoria's domain. Still, the next morning, Harper walked to her favorite Blue Finch cafe, her brain cloudy and her heart confused, only to freeze when she saw the black car again. Same exact one, same sleek, impossible to afford model, parked right in front of the cafe and leaning against it like a goddamn Voguette. Victoria Sterling in a dark coat, sunglasses despite the overcast sky, arms crossed in posture like a threat wrapped in silk. Harper stopped mid-step. "You're stalking me now." Victoria's mouth quirked. "Don't flatter yourself. I come here for the coffee, sure. And I come here for the free Wi-Fi and zero chance of running into the woman who accidentally chauffeured me home last night accidentally." Victoria pushed her sunglasses up into her hair, revealing those Arctic eyes. "You seemed quite at ease in my back seat. Don't read into it. I was emotionally compromised and one blinker away from a breakdown. And yet here you are still curious." Harper hated how true that was. She crossed her arms. "Okay, who are you really?" Because no Uber driver wears Prada and quotes murder like it's on her resume. Victoria tilted her head. "Does it bother you that you don't know?" "No," Harper said too quickly. "It intrigues me and scares me. Mostly scares me." Victoria didn't respond right away. Then she said, "Coffee's on me. Call a payment for your dignity, which you clearly lost somewhere between the Monarch Hotel lobby and my back seat." Harper opened her mouth to argue, but the offer of caffeine was stronger than her pride. She followed Victoria inside. The moment they entered, the barista straightened like royalty had walked in. "Miss Sterling," he said with a nervous smile. "Your usual." Victoria nodded once. Harper shot her a look. "People know you. Some do. Why? Because they pay attention." Harper rolled her eyes and ordered a latte. They sat by the window, and Harper tried not to feel like she was in an interview with a woman who could buy and sell the building without blinking. "So Victoria Sterling, what do you do exactly?" Victoria sipped her coffee. "Does it matter?" "Yes. Because I'd like to know if I was being driven home last night by a woman who commits tax fraud or runs a secret fight club." "Neither," Victoria said with a hint of amusement. "I own things." "What kind of things?" "Companies, real estate, a few patents, a vineyard in Italy." Harper stared. "You're joking." "I rarely do." Harper leaned back in her chair. "Okay, so let me get this straight. You're a billionaire and yet you picked me up last night. Why?" Victoria's expression shifted just barely. "Because you looked like you needed someone who didn't expect anything from you, and I'm good at being that person." That hit Harper somewhere she didn't like to talk about. She swallowed. "Well, mission accomplished." A beat of silence passed between them. Then Victoria said, "What do you do, Harper?" "Freelance designer, mostly logos, occasionally websites, always underpaid." "And you're okay with that?" Harper shrugged. "It pays the rent, barely." Victoria studied her. "You're capable of more." "Wow, that sounded almost supportive. I didn't expect that from someone whose cheekbones could file a restraining order against emotion." Victoria's lips curved slightly. "You have spirit and you have issues. We all do." For a beat, the cafe, the rain, even the acid sting of her ex evaporated. All Harper could register was Victoria cool, composed, with heat banked just beneath the surface and the sudden, reckless urge to touch it, to crack it, to see what lived there when control finally splintered. Why me? Harper asked, voice low. Why hit the brakes last night? Why talk to me now? Victoria leaned in just a fraction, her tone a whisper. Because despite the sarcasm and your tragic taste in shoes, you didn't look at me the way most people do. Huh. And how do most people look at you? Like they want something, and you don't? No, Victoria added, a ghost of a smile. You're too proud to ask. Harper's pulse thudded. And if I wanted something now? Victoria's gaze flicked to her mouth just a heartbeat then back. Then I'd tell you to be very careful. I don't do casual, and I don't do broken. What if I'm already both? Then you should walk away. Harper stood. Maybe I should. Victoria didn't move to stop her, but as Harper reached the door, Victoria's voice followed low, even. But you won't. Harper didn't look back. She didn't leave, either. She stood there, staring into the rain, heart racing, knowing the axis had shifted and she was nowhere near ready for what that meant. 3 days. That's how long she lasted without seeing her, without that perfectly measured voice or the slice of those calculating blue eyes. She tried God. She tried to file it as a one-off, to pretend Victoria Sterling was a glitch in her otherwise predictable, mildly catastrophic life. But every corner of her apartment conspired against her. The t-shirt she'd thrown on, after peeling off the soaked dress, the heel that still hadn't dried, the ache in her chest that wasn't about her ex anymore. It was about the woman who'd unspooled something inside her with a car ride and a cup of coffee. On the 4th day, a package arrived. No return address, just her name, handwritten in elegant, deliberate script. Harper set it on the kitchen counter and opened it with the caution of someone defusing a bomb. Inside was a box, matte black, velvet-lined, and in it a pair of designer heels. The exact same one she'd been wearing the night they met, only new, perfect, untouched. A note rested on top, written in that same immaculate handwriting. For when you're ready to stop running barefoot through your own life. V. Harper stared at it for a full minute before she let out a strangled sound halfway between a laugh and a curse. She should have been furious. She was furious. Who did this woman think she was, buying her shoes like she was some modern-day Cinderella in crisis? And yet she slipped them on just for a second, just to see. They fit like a promise she didn't know how to believe in. That night she found herself outside a private gallery in Midtown. She didn't even remember deciding to go. She just remembered the name Victoria had mentioned in passing during their coffee. A little exhibit I helped fund, and how her fingers had Googled it before her brain could catch up. The gallery was sleek and silent, bathed in moody lighting and the low hum of expensive conversations. And in the far corner, under a painting that looked like it had been torn from a dream, there she was, Victoria, wearing black, always black, her posture straight, one hand holding a glass of red wine like it belonged there more than oxygen. Harper's heart did something violent in her chest. She hated it. She walked straight up to her. So, this is what stalking looks like in reverse. Victoria turned slowly and something flickered in her gaze. Not surprise. Something softer, quieter. You wore them. You sent them. I wanted to see if you'd accept something just for yourself. No strings. No expectations. Harper said, everything you do has strings. Victoria didn't deny it. Instead, she said, do you always talk this much when you're nervous? Harper narrowed her eyes. Do you always manipulate people through retail therapy? Victoria's lips curved. Only the ones who fascinate me. The word hit Harper like a whisper against skin. Why me? She asked again. And this time, her voice was smaller. Honest. Because you walked into my car without a trace of fear. Because you didn't care who I was. Because when I looked at you, I didn't see expectation. I saw fire. Harper swallowed. Fire burns. Only if you're careless. And you're not. Not with things that matter. The air between them shifted, heavy with something electric. Harper looked up at the painting behind Victoria. It was chaotic, red and gold, and fractured shadows. Did you choose this one? I commissioned it. Why? Because it reminded me of what it feels like to lose control. Harper looked at her. Do you ever lose control, Victoria? Victoria's gaze dropped to her mouth. Not until now. Harper's breath caught. She stepped closer, drawn like gravity. Is this dangerous? She whispered. Almost definitely. And yet here we are. Victoria didn't move, didn't touch her, but her voice was a blade wrapped in velvet. If you kiss me now, there's no going back. Harper hesitated. Every voice in her head screamed at her to walk away. That Victoria Sterling was not safe, not stable, not anything close to the life she'd built on sarcasm and solitude. But then Victoria whispered, choose Harper. And that was it. Harper reached up and kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't sweet. It was two storms colliding, mouths crashing, hands searching, breath stolen between gasps. Victoria gripped her waist like she'd been waiting years to touch her. And Harper tangled her fingers in that perfect dark hair like she was afraid Victoria might vanish if she let go. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathless and trembling, Victoria's forehead rested against hers. You shouldn't have done that, she murmured. Then stop me, Harper said. Victoria didn't. Instead, she kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Harper stopped running. The gallery had emptied long before Harper, and Victoria broke apart. The kiss still echoed in Harper's chest like thunder in a canyon, deep and reverberating, shaking loose every wall she'd spent years building. She hadn't meant for it to go that far. She hadn't meant for any of it. But now her lipstick was smudged. Her hands trembled faintly at her sides. And Victoria Sterling was looking at her like she'd been set on fire and didn't mind the burn. We should go, Victoria said, her voice a low hum against the hush of the gallery. Harper nodded, unable to trust her voice. She followed Victoria to the waiting car where the driver, this time not Victoria herself, opened the back door for them without a word. Harper hesitated only a second before slipping inside. The door closed, sealing them into a cocoon of leather and silence and unsaid things. Victoria didn't speak. She simply reached out, took Harper's hand, and laced their fingers together. Her touch was cool, steady, grounding. But inside, Harper felt anything but grounded. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere quiet, Victoria replied. You look like you need silence. And you look like you need someone to ruin your composure, Harper muttered. Victoria's smile was brief, but real. You already did. The ride was short. They pulled up to a penthouse that looked like it belonged in a magazine for people who never asked about prices. The lobby alone smelled like imported leather and expensive decisions. Victoria let her up without a word. And when the elevator doors opened into the apartment itself, no hallway, no neighbors. Harper took a breath that didn't quite reach her lungs. It was all glass and shadow, a skyline view stretching behind floor-to-ceiling windows. Every detail was immaculate, deliberate, like Victoria herself. Harper turned slowly. Do you ever live in anything normal? Normal doesn't interest me, Victoria said, already pouring them both a drink. And I don't think it interests you either. Harper accepted the glass. You don't know me. Not yet. They sat, not quite touching, the city sprawling out beneath them like a promise. Harper stared at the glass in her hand. I should go. You won't. You're very sure of yourself. Only when I'm right. Harper set the drink down. What are we doing, Victoria? We're orbiting around what? Something inevitable. The room felt too small for her heartbeat. You're dangerous. So are you? No, I'm not. You kissed me like you were. Harper turned to her sharply. Is this a game to you? Victoria's expression didn't change. Nothing about you feels like a game. Harper stood, pacing toward the window. Her reflection stared back, eyes too wide, mouth too soft. I don't do this. I don't get involved. Not with people like you. People like me. Powerful, controlled, the kind who don't fall because they don't have to. Victoria approached slowly, stopping just behind her. Maybe I don't fall because I've never met someone who made it worth the risk. Harper turned around, and now Victoria reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Now I'm considering it. Harper's breath hitched. This is too much. Too fast. Then tell me to stop. Harper couldn't. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed her again, desperate, searching, like trying to find oxygen in the dark. Victoria responded in kind, her control fraying at the edges. Their bodies pressed together, heat blooming where their skin met. Victoria's hands were firm, guiding, but never demanding. When they finally pulled apart, Harper was dizzy. "Why do you do this?" she whispered. "You could have anyone. Why me?" Victoria didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Because when I'm around you, I feel like a person. Not a headline, not a symbol, not a bank account." Harper touched her cheek. "You hide so much. So do you." They stood in silence, a thousand unsaid things crackling in the space between them. Then Victoria said, "Stay." Harper's throat tightened. "Just for tonight. For as long as you need." Harper hesitated, but only for a breath. Then she nodded. That night, they didn't sleep. They didn't rush either. They explored. They learned each other's edges. Harper learned that Victoria's laugh was rare but devastating when it happened. That she traced the same scar on her wrist when she was nervous. That she liked silence not because she feared noise, but because she heard too much of it already. Victoria learned that Harper curled inward when she was scared. That her sarcasm was armor, and her touch, when she gave it freely, was the gentlest thing she knew. When dawn bled through the windows, neither of them moved. Harper lay beside her, tracing lazy patterns along Victoria's arm. "This doesn't feel real," she murmured. "It doesn't have to be real to matter," Victoria replied. "It just has to be true." Harper closed her eyes. For once, she didn't feel like running. She felt like staying. The morning after didn't feel like an aftermath. It felt like a breath Harper hadn't realized she'd been holding her entire life. She hadn't expected that. She'd woken up with her cheek against Victoria's shoulder, her fingers curled lightly against the other woman's rib cage, and for one wild quiet moment, she didn't want to move. The city was awake beyond the glass, horns and sirens, and the blur of early sunlight. But inside that penthouse, everything was still safe, warm. Victoria stirred slowly beneath her. "You're still here," she murmured, voice from sleep. Harper shifted, looking up at her. "You sound surprised." "I am. Why?" "Because most people run before the damage can happen." Harper searched her face. "And you think I'm going to damage you?" Victoria didn't answer, but her fingers threaded gently through Harper's hair, and her silence said more than words could. "You don't know how to let people stay, do you?" Harper whispered. "No," Victoria admitted, "but I want to learn." Harper leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her collarbone. "Then don't try to control this. Just let it be messy." "I don't do messy." "Then maybe messy is exactly what you need." Victoria exhaled through a quiet laugh. "You're dangerous." "So are you." They stayed wrapped around each other for hours, dozing in and out of sleep, touching in ways that were less about lust and more about learning the shape of something new. But eventually, reality started to press against the edges. Harper's phone buzzed repeatedly. Her work, her real life, her responsibilities, all clawing their way back. She sat up reluctantly. "I should go." Victoria didn't stop her, but her hand lingered on Harper's wrist. "Come back tonight." Harper looked at her. "You don't give up easily, do you?" "Not when I find something worth holding on to." Harper nodded slowly. "Okay." Tonight she dressed, stealing one last look at Victoria curled in the silk sheets, all shadows and soft light, then stepped back into a world that felt sharper than it had 24 hours ago. Her apartment was cold by comparison, too quiet. Her inbox was overflowing. Her clients were impatient, but none of it settled the ache beneath her ribs. All day, Harper felt like she was drifting somewhere between two versions of herself. The one who made sarcastic jokes and outdated shoes, and the one who had kissed Victoria Sterling like she owned the night. When evening fell, she didn't go back. Not right away. She sat on her couch with her phone in her lap, thumb hovering over Victoria's name and her contacts. Then she put it down, not because she didn't want to go, but because she did too much. She needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out whether she was falling or just caught in the gravity of someone more powerful than she'd ever known. That's when the knock came, soft, measured. Her heart jumped. She opened the door slowly, and there she was, Victoria, in a tailored black coat, hair slightly tousled by the wind, eyes unreadable. "I told myself I'd give you time," she said, "and then I realized I don't want to lie to you. I don't want to pretend I'm indifferent to this." Harper blinked. "You came here. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking you'd talk yourself out of coming." "I almost did." Victoria stepped inside without waiting for permission. She moved like the room bent around her presence, like the air shifted when she exhaled. "You scare me," Harper admitted quietly. "Not because of who you are, but because of what you make me feel." Victoria turned to her, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. "You scare me, too." Harper stepped forward. "What are we doing, Victoria?" "Something I've never done before." "And what's that?" "Letting go." Harper reached out, taking her hand. "Then let's do it together." Victoria pulled her in slowly, gently, and kissed her like she was something breakable and sacred all at once. In that instant, the strain that had stretched taut between them for days didn't snap, it shifted. It deepened. The kiss wasn't a blaze this time. It was a surrender. Later, they ended up on the floor of Harper's apartment, cocooned in a blanket, legs intertwined. Victoria idly traced slow circles on Harper's thigh. "This place is small," she said. "It's mine," Harper answered. "I like it. It smells like books and sarcasm." Harper smirked. "And overpriced candles. I could buy you 100. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because I want you here without paying your way inside." Victoria's eyes softened. "You don't have to prove anything to me." "Neither do you. You make me feel like I can be someone else," Victoria murmured. "Someone better." Harper pressed her forehead to hers. "You already are." And while the city kept moving beyond the window, they left unspoken what both were beginning to recognize, that maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't burn them down. Maybe this time, they were the fire together. There was something frightening and beautiful about falling for Victoria Sterling. It wasn't the money, the control, or the way she looked in black silk at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was how she opened, slowly, like a lock surrendering its secrets, click after click. Harper hadn't meant to fall. Not for her. Not again. She'd promised herself that after everything, after heartbreak, betrayal, and the careful rebuilding of all the pieces, she would stay fortified. But Victoria didn't smash walls. She walked through them as if they'd never been there, leaving Harper bare in ways she hadn't known were possible. Days began to blur into a cadence neither named yet both understood. Sometimes Harper woke in Victoria's bed, the skyline sliding past glass like a living painting. Other times they curled on Harper's floor with takeout, Victoria barefoot and unguarded in a way the world would never believe. They didn't put a label on it, but whatever it was filled the space between them with the weight of gravity. One night, Harper stood at Victoria's window, watching the city hum below. "You know," she said, low, "I used to think people like you didn't feel anything real." Victoria moved beside her, handed her a glass of wine. "And now I think you feel too much. You just hide it better than anyone." Victoria didn't speak, but the brush of her fingers against Harper's said enough. The intimacy had moved past touch. It lived in the way Victoria began opening drawers Harper had never dared to reach for, in how she listened, truly listened, when Harper spoke about her mother's death, the career that never quite lifted, the hollow ache of moving through life unseen. Harper learned things, too. That rain kept Victoria awake. That she had no siblings, no parents left. That most of her friends were contacts. that she couldn't recall the last time she let anyone see her without armor until Harper. That should have been enough, but something started to tilt. At first it was barely there. A missed call Victoria ignored. The small knot in her shoulders when the screen lit. A name Harper didn't know flashed across it. Sloane. Harper kept quiet. She didn't want to fracture what they had by chasing answers she wasn't sure she was entitled to. But doubt is a quiet toxin. It doesn't shout. It seeps, slow and patient. By the time she finally asked, it was already too late to pretend she wasn't afraid of the answer. "Who's Sloane?" she said one evening as they lay tangled in Harper's sheets, the rain whispering against the windows. Victoria's body went still. Not dramatically, not with guilt or panic, just still. "She's no one," Victoria said too quickly. "She doesn't feel like no one." Victoria sat up, brushing a hand through her hair. "She's someone from before." "Before what?" "Before you," Harper swallowed. Something like that. "And she's texting you in the middle of the night." "Why?" Victoria looked at her, and for once her expression was unreadable. "Because she thinks I'm still hers." "Are you?" Silence. Harper's chest tightened. "Victoria, I told her it was over a long time ago. But Sloane doesn't believe in endings. And you?" Victoria looked at her and something cracked. "I didn't expect you." Harper sat up, pulling the sheets tighter. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. Are you still seeing her?" "No." "Are you still in love with her?" Victoria flinched. That was answer enough. Harper stood. "You should go." "Harper, I can't do this. I can't be your in-between. Your maybe. I've already been someone's almost. I can't be yours." Victoria stood too slowly, like every movement hurt. "I didn't lie to you. You just didn't tell me enough of the truth." The silence between them was colder than anything Victoria had ever said. Then in the quiet, she reached for Harper's hand. "Don't let this end here. Then tell me you're not still in love with her." Victoria looked at her, jaw tight, eyes full of something raw and sharp and painful. And she said nothing. That silence was louder than a confession. Harper pulled her hand back. "Goodbye, Victoria." And for the first time since the night they met, Victoria didn't follow. The door closed behind her like a blade. Harper stood in the dark, heart pounding, 1,000 things unsaid still burning on her tongue. But all she could think was, "I should have known. I should have protected myself." But how do you protect yourself from something that felt like fate? The days after Victoria left were quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. It had shape, weight, memory. Harper didn't sleep well. She didn't eat much. She stared at her laptop without processing a single word on the screen. Her design software open but untouched. Her apartment had never felt so small, so empty. Everything reminded her. The curve of her couch where Victoria had once rested her head. The candle she lit that Victoria had mocked for being dramatically floral. Even the silence itself sounded like her. And yet Harper didn't reach out. She couldn't. Not when the echo of Victoria's silence, her refusal to answer, her inability to say, "I'm not in love with her," still rang louder than any apology ever could. Pride was part of it, yes, but it was also self-preservation. Harper had spent too long putting herself back together after being someone's second choice. She wouldn't do it again. She couldn't survive it twice. On the 5th day, the gallery called. Apparently, Victoria had put Harper's name down for a solo exhibit 6 months earlier. Something she'd done without telling her. Quietly, without expectation. Harper almost didn't take the call. But something about it. Something about the idea that Victoria had believed in her art before Harper even knew she wanted to show it, broke something open inside her. She went not to see Victoria, not yet, but to stand in the space she had unknowingly been building toward. The gallery was bright, sun-washed, quiet. Her pieces, mostly abstract, chaotic, full of color and rawness, hung on pristine white walls. And in the center of it all, a single painting that made her breath catch. It was hers, but she hadn't put it there. She'd painted it months ago and shoved it under her bed, unfinished, too personal. A mess of red and gray and streaks of black. Grief, anger, desire. She walked toward it slowly. There was a small card beneath it. Donated anonymously by V. Harper stared at the initials until her eyes blurred. She didn't cry, not yet. She just stood there, heart pounding, surrounded by pieces of herself she hadn't realized anyone else could see. When she left the gallery, the sun was setting. She didn't know where she was walking until she was already standing outside Victoria's building. The penthouse lights were off. Harper didn't go up. She just stood there staring at the place that had once made her feel invincible, and now felt unreachable. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Just one line. Come to the vineyard. Harper's chest tightened. She had known Victoria had left town. She hadn't known she had fled. But of course she had. It was what they both did. Run when it got too close. She almost deleted the message. Almost. Instead, she stared at it for a long time before typing why. The answer came back immediately because I can't say it unless you're looking at me. Harper stood in the cold twilight for a long time, trying to convince herself that walking away was the smarter choice, that staying angry was safer. But safety never made her feel alive, so she packed a bag. The drive to the vineyard was long and winding. Autumn had already begun its quiet descent, painting the trees in gold and fire. When she arrived, it was nearly dark. The vineyard stretched out like something out of a storybook. Rolling hills, rows of vines glowing silver under the moonlight, and at the center, a modern house made almost entirely of glass and wood, minimalist and haunting. Victoria was waiting on the porch. She didn't speak, just watched as Harper stepped out of the car. You came, she said quietly. You asked. Harper walked slowly toward her. Why did you leave the city? Because every part of it reminded me of you. And you thought running would fix that. No, Victoria said. I thought space would make it hurtless. I was wrong. Harper stopped in front of her. Why did you bring me here? Victoria took a breath. Because this is the only place I've ever gone to feel like myself. And I needed you to see that version of me. The one that doesn't wear armor. The one that's scared. Harper's voice softened. Of what? Of losing something before I even have the right to call it mine. Silence stretched between them. Then Victoria said, I'm not in love with Sloane. It was a long time ago. What I felt for her was built on obligation, guilt, power. It wasn't love. Not like this. Harper's pulse stumbled. Then why didn't you say that? Because I didn't know what this was. I've never felt this before. You make me unsteady, and I didn't know how to let that be a good thing. Victoria stepped closer. And now I want to fall and I want it to be you. Harper's breath caught. This doesn't erase what happened. I know. But it matters. It's the only thing that matters. Harper looked at her, really saw her, and for the first time, she didn't see the billionaire, the perfect lines and polished edges, but the woman underneath, the one choosing to stay. Then show me who you are here, Harper said. No city, no walls, just you. Victoria nodded slowly. Then stay, not for a night, for a while. Harper reached for her hand. Okay, but you have to stop buying my art anonymously. Victoria's smile was small and real. Deal. And for the first time in weeks, the tight ache in Harper's chest began to ease. Not gone, not erased, often by something she hadn't dared name until now. Hope. The vineyard wasn't an escape. It felt like stepping into a different version of herself, one where she didn't have to be guarded or clever, or always ready to deflect. Here, she was just Harper, and Victoria, stripped of city armor, and the polished distance she wore like a second skin, was simply human, which astonished Harper most of all. Mornings were quiet in the house. Victoria always woke first, already in soft cotton, barefoot, sipping espresso on the deck with a notebook balanced on her lap. She wrote before the sun burned the mist away. Once, Harper asked what she put in it. Victoria only said, "Things I don't know how to say out loud." They settled into a rhythm, days walking between rows of vines. Victoria explaining things Harper had never cared about before. Harvest cycles, soil conditions, how to tell the difference between grapes meant for aging and those that would be bottled young. At night, they cooked or tried to. Victoria was shockingly bad in the kitchen, and Harper teased her relentlessly for it. How can you own half of New York and still not know how to crack an egg without shattering it like your enemy's dreams? Because I pay people to do it for me. Victoria deadpanned. The eggs or the dream shattering? Both. They laughed more in those days than Harper thought was possible after everything. But underneath the warmth, a question still lingered. When they both circled around like it might detonate if spoken to soon. What are we becoming? Harper wasn't sure when it changed from staying for a while to not wanting to leave. It happened gradually. Her toothbrush found its way into Victoria's bathroom. Her favorite mug appeared on a kitchen shelf. Her sketchbook sat permanently open on the table near the window where the light hit just right. One afternoon, as Harper sat cross-legged on the porch sketching vines, Victoria walked up behind her and slid a hand into her hair, gently tugging until Harper leaned back to look up at her. "What?" Harper asked, smiling. Victoria's expression was unreadable. "You look like you belong here." Harper's chest had a little. "That scares me." "Me, too." They didn't talk about the city. They didn't talk about what happened with Sloane. But one night, lying tangled in bed sheets and half drunk on wine and each other's skin, Harper turned to her and said, "What happens when this ends?" Victoria's body went still. Then slowly, she said, "It doesn't have to, but it will, won't it? Eventually, the world will come back. You'll get calls. I'll get scared. Something will crack. Not if we choose not to let it." "Do you really believe that?" "I want to." Harper looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Tell me something no one else knows." Victoria exhaled, staring at the ceiling. "I haven't spoken to my father in 13 years. Harper blinked. "Why?" "Because he told me that love was a distraction. That women like me weren't built for it. That if I wanted to succeed, I had to choose power over everything else." Harper's heart twisted. "Did you believe him?" "For a long time, I did." And now Victoria looked at her, voice barely a whisper. "Now I think he was afraid of what love would demand from him. And I think I've been afraid for the same reason." Harper leaned in and kissed her slowly, tenderly. "Love doesn't ask you to give up power. It just asks you to share it." Victoria swallowed hard. "And if I don't know how, then I'll teach you." That night, Victoria cried quietly in Harper's arms. No dramatics, no grand declarations. Just silent tears on bare skin and Harper holding her like she was something sacred. The next morning they woke up to the vineyard bathed in golden light. Victoria made coffee. Harper made toast. And just as Harper sat down to sketch, Victoria walked up behind her with a soft smile and said, "I want you to stay." Harper looked up slowly. "I am staying. No, I mean permanently. I want this to be your home." Harper froze. "Victoria, you don't have to say yes right now, but I needed to say it." Harper's heart pounded. "I've never had a home that wasn't temporary." "Then let this be the first." Harper stood, hands trembling slightly. She reached for Victoria's face, cupping it gently. "You scare the hell out of me." "Good," Victoria whispered. "That means it matters." And then Harper kissed her like a woman choosing something terrifying and beautiful all at once. Because maybe love didn't come with guarantees, but it came with moments like this. And Harper was finally ready to stop running from them. Harper didn't say yes right away. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. The way Victoria had looked at her, voice stripped of its usual control, eyes filled with something terrifying and honest. It had wrecked her. But even with her heart pounding and every cell screaming stay, Harper knew herself well enough to understand that rushing this moment would cheapen it. So she kissed Victoria slowly, then whispered against her lips, "Let me be sure. Let me say yes when I know I can mean it forever." Victoria didn't flinch, didn't retreat. She just nodded and murmured, "That's all I ask." The next few days passed in a dreamlike haze, softer around the edges than anything Harper had known. They made love in the quiet, slow way that had nothing to do with seduction and everything to do with devotion. Victoria wasn't just careful, she was reverent. Like Harper was something she never thought she'd be allowed to touch. And Harper, in turn, found herself letting go more than she ever had. There were moments when she'd catch Victoria watching her from across the vineyard, the wind in her hair, the golden light brushing her skin. And Harper would feel so deeply seen it almost hurt. But something shifted on the fourth morning. Harper had gone to town alone. Victoria had an urgent call she couldn't ignore. Something about international investors. And while Harper hated the way the old wall crept back into Victoria's tone, she also knew it was part of her. She stopped by the cafe in town, picked up some supplies, then browsed the small bookstore on Main Street. And that's when she saw her Sloane sitting outside with a glass of wine at 10 in the morning, like she owned the sun. Harper froze. The woman was beautiful in the kind of way that had been trained into her. Expensive cheekbones, calculating eyes, and the casual confidence of someone who had never been told no. She didn't recognize Harper. Not at first. But when their eyes locked, something dark and sharp flickered behind Sloane's smile. "You must be the flavor of the month," she said smoothly. Harper narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me. I've seen your face," Sloane continued, swirling her wine. "Victoria keeps you close." For now, Harper's spine straightened. "You don't know anything about us." "I know her," Sloane said, smiling without warmth. "And I know what happens when she gets scared. She runs. Or worse, she retreats into that cold little place where nothing touches her. I lived in that place for 3 years. And I'm not you." "No," Sloane said, standing. "You're younger, softer, easier to break." Harper didn't speak. She didn't trust herself to. She simply turned and walked away, fists clenched, pulse hammering. The encounter left a crack she couldn't quite seal. When she returned to the vineyard, Victoria was already home, waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of wine and an expression Harper couldn't read. "You saw her," Victoria said without preamble. Harper stopped at the bottom of the steps. "You knew she was in town. She doesn't live here anymore." "But yes, she called me this morning." "Why?" "She said she wanted closure." I didn't reply. "Did you know I'd run into her?" "No, but I'm not surprised she made herself visible." "She said some things." "Of course she did." "Victoria." Harper exhaled. "She said, 'You run when you get scared.'" Victoria was silent for a moment. Then she looked down at the glass in her hand. "She's not wrong." Harper stepped closer. "Do you still love her?" "No, but she hurt you." "Yes, and you hurt her in ways I'm not proud of." Harper climbed the last few steps and took the glass from her. "I'm not her." Victoria met her eyes. "No, you're the one I would never forgive myself for losing." That landed somewhere low and hot in Harper's chest. She set the glass aside and wrapped her arms around Victoria's waist, resting her forehead against her. "I'm scared too, you know." "Of what?" "Of being the only one who stays." Victoria's voice was quiet. "I don't want to run anymore." "Then stay with me. Even when it gets hard, especially then." Victoria nodded slowly. "Okay." They didn't speak more that night. They didn't need to. The next morning, Harper woke up early. She walked the vineyard alone, barefoot in the dew, letting the air clear her mind. When she returned, Victoria was in the kitchen, shirt unbuttoned, hair still damp from the shower, humming a song Harper didn't recognize. And that's when Harper knew. She walked up behind her, slid her arms around her waist, and said, "Yes." Victoria stilled. "Yes, I want to stay. Not for a while. Not for a season. I want this to be home." Victoria turned around slowly, eyes wide, lips parted. "Harper, I'm not saying I won't get scared. I will. I'm not saying it'll be perfect. It won't. But I'm choosing this. Choosing you." Victoria looked at her like she wasn't real. Then slowly she whispered, "I love you." Harper smiled. "Took you long enough." And then Victoria was kissing her, spinning her in the middle of the kitchen. Both of them laughing and breathless and wide open. No more running. No more what ifs. Just a truth. They had fought for a home they were building with every look, every touch, every terrifying, beautiful step forward. They say love doesn't fix you, that it doesn't erase the past, doesn't fill the holes life has carved into you. And Harper knew that. She knew it in the way her heart still fluttered with uncertainty. Every time Victoria said something too softly, she knew it in the way she still caught herself watching for signs of retreat. But what this love did, was make her want to stay anyway. And Victoria, for all her sharpness and silence, wanted that, too. After Harper said yes, after Victoria whispered, "I love you," like it hurt to say, everything changed. And yet, nothing really did. They still woke up tangled in sheets and sunlight. They still bickered about who brewed the superior coffee. The world still pressed in sometimes, seeping through hairline cracks in the glass walls. But now there was an anchor, promise, choice, a beginning. One afternoon on the porch, watching the vines ripple in the wind, Harper glanced over with a sketch pad on her knees. "What if I painted you?" Victoria's brow lifted. "Fully clothed, I assume?" Harper's mouth curved. "No promises." Victoria rolled her eyes, but didn't object. She only tilted her head. "You think you can capture this?" "Not the version everyone thinks they know," Harper said, turning to a fresh page. "The one I've met here. The one who laughs when I threaten to burn the kitchen down. The one who writes in a notebook every morning and pretends it isn't poetry." Victoria didn't answer, but she looked away just long enough for Harper to catch the emotion working in her throat. The next hour moved in near silence, Harper sketching, brows knit, while Victoria read beside her. Now and then Harper glanced up, stealing fragments of Victoria's face, the way her lashes held the light, the slight clench of her jaw when she fought a smile. "You're staring," Victoria murmured, eyes still on the page. "I'm studying. Is there a difference? You tell me." That night, Harper finished the first pass, mostly an outline, but somehow already alive. She leaned it against the wall to dry and slipped into bed beside Victoria. "You never asked me to prove anything," Harper said softly. "That's how I knew I could trust you." Victoria turned toward her. "I never wanted to be loved because I was impressive. I wanted to be loved in spite of it." "You are." Victoria kissed her, then slow, certain, grateful. Peace, though, was never a long-term resident in their world. Not with history's sharp claws and people like Sloane who didn't know how to stay gone. The letter arrived 2 days later. No return address. Elegant stationery. Victoria opened it without a word, scanning fast, her jaw tightening line by line. Across from her, Harper felt her stomach drop. "What is it?" Victoria folded the page with care and set it aside. "Sloane's threatening to go public." "With what?" "Everything. The relationship. The breakup. My personal life. You." Harper's pulse sank. "Why now?" "Because she wants control back. And because I finally took it from her." "What does she think she'll gain?" Victoria's voice held steady barely. "Revenge. Chaos. She knows how the world looks at powerful women who dare to be vulnerable. She wants to remind me what it costs." Harper stood slowly, crossing to her. "So, let her talk." "Harper, no. You've built empires. You've survived worse than this. And if people know about us, if the world sees me next to you, then let them. I'm not afraid of being seen anymore." Victoria looked at her with something like, "Oh, you're not scared." "Terrified," Harper said honestly. "But not of her. I'm only scared of losing what we've built here. And if hiding is the price, I won't pay it." That night, they sat on the porch with 2 glasses of wine, and the entire sky above them. "You know," Victoria said quietly, "I used to think love was a risk I couldn't afford. And now, Now I think not loving you would be the greatest risk of all." Harper smiled, threading their fingers together. "So, what do we do?" Victoria exhaled. "We live out loud. No apologies. Even when it gets messy, especially then." The next day, Victoria sent a letter of her own, one that would be published public. Intentional. She didn't name names. She didn't respond to threats. But she wrote for the first time in her life with vulnerability, about love, about freedom, about choosing happiness even when the world expected control. Harper watched as it went viral. Her face stayed out of it for now. But the message was clear. Victoria Sterling had fallen in love, and she was no longer afraid of anyone knowing it. That night, Victoria turned to Harper in bed and said, "I've never let anyone change my world before." Harper rested her hand over Victoria's heart. "I didn't change it. I just showed you how much of it was still worth fighting for." And for the first time, Victoria slept through the rain. The storm didn't hit all at once. It crept in, quiet at first, like a whisper you don't realize is dangerous until it's already sunk its teeth into you. It started with a photo, grainy, taken from across the street. The angle just close enough to show Harper's hand resting on Victoria's knee in the back of her car. Then came the gallery leak. One of Harper's unfinished paintings stolen, uploaded, dissected online by strangers who had never met her, who knew nothing about what her art meant, but who suddenly had opinions. Headlines followed loud and wrong. Victoria Sterling's mysterious new muse. Power and passion. The woman behind the billionaire. Ice Queen no more has love melted Victoria Sterling. Harper read every single one. She told herself she wouldn't, that she didn't care, that it didn't matter. But she read them, and the words lodged themselves like splinters. Victoria, on the other hand, didn't flinch. She showed up to meetings, to press events, to public appearances with Harper on her arm and her gaze steady. When asked about the rumors, she said only one thing: "Some things are too good to hide." But Harper felt herself shrinking, not because Victoria didn't protect her. She did. But because the world refused to see her as anything more than an accessory. Her inbox thinned. Projects vanished. Some clients ghosted entirely. One texted her apologetically, "You're too controversial right now." And in the middle of all of it, the email arrived. Paris, a solo exhibition, a real one, curated by one of the most respected art institutions in Europe. Flights, housing, promotion, everything covered. On one condition: no mention of her personal life, no references to Victoria, no complications. "They want to sell the work," her agent said on the call. "They don't want the narrative to overpower it." Harper had nodded. She'd agreed to think about it. Then she stood in the middle of the vineyard with the wind in her hair, and 1,000 things burning in her chest, and told Victoria everything. "They want me without you," she whispered. Victoria had gone still. "And what do you want?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do," Victoria said gently. "You want to prove you're more than what they see. I get it. Do you? Better than anyone. Then tell me what to do." "I can't," Victoria said, "because if I tell you to go and you don't come back, I'll never forgive myself. But if I ask you to stay and you lose this chance, you'll never forgive me." Harper stared at her. "So what do we do?" Victoria reached for her face. "You go. You show them who you are. And if you still want me after all of that, after Paris, after the noise, after the silence, I'll be here." Harper left 2 days later. The flight was long. The apartment they gave her was beautiful but cold. The gallery was sleek, the staff polished, the walls blindingly white, and everything felt wrong. Her name was on every program, her work framed perfectly, but her story, her truth, had been scrubbed clean. One curator said it casually over wine. "It's stronger without the drama." "No." Harper smiled tightly. She nodded. But every night she painted alone, raw, barefoot in the studio space they gave her. She painted Victoria's hands, her eyes, the hollow space she left behind. She painted grief and desire and the ache of being almost seen. On opening night, the room was filled with champagne and beautiful eyes. Critics murmured behind gold-rimmed glasses. Collectors stood with their arms folded, pretending to understand what they didn't feel. Harper stood near the back, exhausted, hollowed out, until she heard it. "She paints like she's bleeding," someone said. Her heart stopped. She turned and there she was, Victoria, standing in a storm-colored suit. Her presence a wave that silenced the room. She didn't wait. She didn't look for approval. She crossed the space and said, "I couldn't stay away." Harper's throat tightened. "You shouldn't be here. You said that once. The first night we met. That was different, was it?" Victoria looked at the nearest painting, the one Harper had poured herself into at 3 a.m., shaking from too much coffee and too little sleep. "This one," she said quietly. "It's me. It's not a portrait. It doesn't have to be." Victoria turned to her. "I spent years controlling everything I touched, building a world no one could question. And then you walked into it barefoot, mascara running, telling me to drive before you burn the city down." Harper laughed despite herself. "I meant it. I know." Victoria took her hand. People were watching. Phones were raised. Someone was already recording. But Victoria didn't care. "Let them see," she said. "Let them know. I'm not hiding you. I'm not hiding us." Harper whispered, "I thought I had to do this alone." "You don't. What if it ruins everything? Then we build something better." Harper looked at her, truly looked, not as the woman the world feared or admired, not as the billionaire, the enigma, the story, but as the person who had loved her enough to let her go. "They wanted me to erase you," Harper said, "and you didn't. I tried." Victoria smiled and failed miserably. Completely good. And then in front of the crowd, in front of the world, Harper kissed her. Not for the cameras, not for the performance, for herself, for them, for everything they'd fought for. The room burst into something she couldn't hear. Flashbulbs, gasps, scattered applause. But all Harper could feel was Victoria's mouth against hers, steady and warm and real. When they pulled back, Victoria whispered, "So now what?" Harper's smile was slow. "Sure, now I paint and I stay. And we stopped pretending this wasn't always inevitable." Victoria nodded together. "Always." And that night, when the gallery closed and the city went quiet, Harper walked barefoot through the streets of Paris, hand in hand with the woman she had once mistaken for a stranger. And for the first time in her life, she felt like the world finally saw her exactly as she was. No longer someone's shadow, but the center of her own story. Paris didn't sleep after that kiss, not the part of it that mattered. By the time the gallery emptied and the lights dimmed, Harper and Victoria were still standing in the center of the room, forehead to forehead, the noise behind them fading into something distant and meaningless. They slipped out the back in a kind of trance, fingers entwined, tuning out the lenses and the whispers. Victoria's driver was waiting. They didn't speak the whole ride to the hotel, not for lack of words, but because there were too many. The suite door had barely clicked shut when Harper turned and kissed her again, slower. A different kind of desperate. She framed Victoria's face like it was the last true thing in the world and breathed. "Thank you for coming." Victoria's voice splintered. "If you hadn't come back to me, I would have crossed oceans." They spent the night wrapped around each other, not like lovers chasing heat they'd misplaced, but like people relearning how to breathe. The heavy quiet loosened, and in its place settled something gentler. Intimacy without shame, softness without fear. By morning, the world detonated. Harper's phone wouldn't stop vibrating, mentions, headlines, photos. The kiss was everywhere, pulled apart from every angle. Praise, backlash, the usual storm. Her inbox became a battlefield. Half invitations, half threats. After 5 minutes, she shut the laptop. "Don't read it," Victoria said softly. "Don't give them a version of you that bleeds for their entertainment. I'm not afraid of them." Harper answered, "I'm just tired." Victoria crossed the room and cradled her face. Then let me carry some of it. You already carry too much. And I'd still carry you. Harper leaned into her palm. They want us ashamed. They want a show. They want tragedy. I refuse to let them turn this into one. So what do we do now? Harper asked. Victoria drew a breath. We choose how to exist. Loud or quiet but together. On our terms. Harper met her gaze, sharp. Then we start by telling the truth. Not a headline. Not an expose. Our story, in our voice. Victoria blinked. You want to tell it? Yes. Not for them, for us. For the girls who need to know they're allowed to be seen. Victoria nodded slowly. Then we write it together. They spent the next week at the vineyard, back in their quiet corner of the world, spilling their story onto paper. No editors, no spin, just memories, scars, confessions. Victoria opened her notebook and let Harper read everything she'd written since the night. They met pages brimming with longing, self-doubt, and tender flashes Victoria had never shared with anyone. Harper wept as she read. Victoria didn't stop her. You were never cold, Harper whispered. You were just afraid no one would touch you without taking something. You were the first who didn't ask for anything but truth. When they finished, they posted it without fanfare, no statement, no tour, just a simple photo. Victoria's hand holding Harper's ink-stained fingers. Captioned, "This is ours." The response was immense, but different this time. Not scandal, not spectacle. Messages poured in from women everywhere, young and old, closeted and outspoken, broken and mending women who recognized themselves in the fear, the fight, and the love inside those words. The media noise didn't vanish, but it changed shape, became something they could hold. Harper still lost clients. Victoria still received threats. But for every door that closed, 5 opened. And through it all, they stayed exactly what they promised together. But peace was never permanent. Not in a world that fears women who know their worth. A month later, the gallery sent word that one of Harper's paintings had been defaced. Red paint splashed across the canvas. A slur carved into the wall beside it. Security footage caught nothing. The police shrugged. Hate is loud, Victoria said as she held Harper close that night. But so is love. I'm tired of fighting. Then we rest. And tomorrow we paint over what they tried to destroy. You make it sound easy. It's not, but you make it worth it. They repainted the gallery wall together. They framed the ruined painting in gold leaf, not to hide it, but to remind the world that love survives what tries to erase it. And when a small queer museum in Berlin asked to display that painting as a symbol of resistance, Harper said yes, because by then she knew who she was and who they were. To women in love, publicly, fiercely, tenderly. No apologies. That night, Harper stood under the stars on the porch of the vineyard and said, "Do you ever think about the night we met?" Victoria smiled against her neck. "Every day I mistook you for a driver, and you mistook me for someone untouchable. I don't anymore. Good. I love you, Victoria Sterling. I love you more." Harper Lane. And this time there were no reporters, no flashes, no crowd. Just 2 women holding on to something the world had tried to tear apart. Still standing, still loving, still choosing each other. Every single day. It was early spring when the letter arrived. Unassuming envelope. No return address. Just Harper's name written in a sharp, elegant hand that looked vaguely familiar. Though she couldn't place it right away, she opened it on the porch, bare feet tucked under her, a cup of coffee cooling on the rail. The vineyard stretched in soft green rolls before her, morning light catching on new buds. Victoria was inside, still asleep, her side of the bed warm and tangled. Harper smiled just thinking about it, but the smile faded as her eyes scanned the letter. 1 page, typed the words careful, measured, and cold. A legal request. A formal cease and desist from a family investment firm, still partially connected to Victoria's name. One Victoria had divested from years ago, but that clearly hadn't forgiven her for her very public disgrace. The letter claimed Harper's presence was damaging to the company's reputation, that her continued association with Victoria had sparked investor concerns, that the upcoming Berlin Museum exhibition was considered provocative and misaligned with the conservative values of long-standing partners. Harper read it twice, then a third time, and when she looked up, the vineyard seemed suddenly too quiet, too far from the rest of the world. She went inside, still holding the letter. Victoria was sitting at the kitchen island now, wrapped in a robe, reading something on her tablet. Her eyes met Harper's instantly. She saw the tension, the shift. "What is it?" Harper handed her the letter in silence. Victoria read it. Her jaw clenched. "This is I know. They have no legal grounds. I know that, too." "Then why do you look like you're about to cry?" Harper sat down. "Because I don't care about what they say, but I care about what it means." Victoria folded the letter and set it aside. "It means the world is exactly what we knew it was. Fragile, judgmental, patriarchal, but it still has power, and I don't want to be the reason you lose something you spent your whole life building." "You're not Victoria. Listen to me," she said, taking Harper's hand. "I left that company for a reason. I knew what it stood for. I knew who sat at those tables, but I never thought they'd come for you. They didn't have to. You made me visible and I chose it. I chose this. But that means we have to be prepared for what visibility costs." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing, Harper." "No, I mean it. I don't want you to fight this. You want me to ignore it. I want us to live like it doesn't own us. That's not always safe. I'm not looking for safe anymore." Victoria studied her like she was something both fragile and invincible. Then she nodded. "All right. We don't fight them. We outlive them." They didn't respond to the letter. They didn't make a statement. They simply went to Berlin. The museum was small, modern, painted in pale concrete and light. Harper's ruined painting hung in the center of the main gallery, framed in gold and surrounded by photographs of the vineyard, of Victoria's notebook pages of pieces of their story, the real story. At the opening, women cried quietly with hands pressed to their mouths. Some of them brought their daughters. One brought her mother. And in the middle of it all, Harper stood beside Victoria and felt something shift. It wasn't vindication. It was belonging. After the exhibit, the two of them disappeared for a while. No press, no posts. Just time. They went to Italy, where Victoria's vineyard partner had invited them to a small retreat. In the hills, they drank wine on cliffs, swam naked in warm lakes, slept until noon, read poetry out loud. They didn't talk about the future. They lived it. One afternoon, as Harper lay in the grass, sketchbook open across her stomach, Victoria brushed hair from her face and asked, "Do you ever miss the city?" "Sometimes," Harper said. "The noise, the chaos, the feeling that anything could happen." "And now," Harper turned to her, "now I like knowing exactly what's going to happen when I wake up." "And what's that?" "You still here?" Victoria kissed her softly, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything. Later, as they shared a bottle of wine on the balcony of the villa, Victoria grew quiet, thoughtful, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I used to think legacy was about what you leave behind," she said. Now I think it's about who you build it with." Harper set her glass down. "Are we building something?" "I think we already have." "And what comes next?" Victoria looked at her, not afraid for once. "Whatever you want. Marriage, no marriage. Dogs, chickens, 10 vineyards, 0 headlines. I don't care, as long as it's you." Harper's breath caught. That sounded dangerously like a proposal. Did it? Yes. Then maybe it was. Harper smiled, heart thudding. "Ask me again when I'm wearing shoes and not covered in grass. Deal?" And in that promise whispered over wine and sky, Harper felt it again. That moment where love stopped being a risk and started being the reason. The ring didn't arrive in a box. It wasn't velvet-lined or presented in some grand gesture with cameras or champagne. It showed up on the kitchen counter quietly early one morning, while Harper was still asleep upstairs. She found it a few hours later, sunlight spilling across the marble, the smell of roasted espresso still clinging to the air. A gold band, simple, unpolished, timeless. A folded note beneath it read only, "No pressure, just permanence. V." Harper stared at it for a long time, heart stuttering in her chest like it didn't quite know what to do. She didn't pick it up. Not yet. She just sat down beside it and whispered into the silence, "God, you're impossible." Victoria didn't bring it up. Not that day. Not the one after either. Instead, they lived like always. Slow mornings, long walks. Harper sketching barefoot on the balcony while Victoria read the paper and made sarcastic comments about the state of the world. But something was shifting. A current beneath the surface. A quiet hum that said, "We're ready, but we're still afraid." That night, Harper stood in front of the mirror brushing her teeth when Victoria appeared behind her already. In a t-shirt, hair still damp from the shower. "You saw it?" Victoria asked. Harper met her eyes in the mirror. "I saw it." And Harper rinsed her mouth, turned slowly, leaned against the sink. "You want to marry me. I want to keep choosing you, however the world names it." Harper crossed her arms. "And if I say no?" Victoria's voice didn't flinch. "Then we keep choosing each other every day with or without the ring." Harper searched her face. "You're serious? Always? You're not even nervous?" "I'm terrified." Harper stepped closer. "Then why do you look so calm?" "Because I've never been this sure of anything." Harper felt the breath catch in her throat. "You didn't ask me." "Victoria." "Because I wanted to give you the chance to ask me." Silence bloomed between them, full, warm, brimming with possibility. The next morning, Harper woke up early. She padded downstairs and found the ring exactly where she'd left it. This time, she lifted it, turned it to the light, and let its weight settle in her palm like something inevitable. 20 minutes later, when Victoria wandered into the kitchen, hair rumpled, hoodie slipping off one shoulder, Harper was waiting. She held the ring up between two fingers. "You didn't kneel," she said. "I didn't want to scare you off. You didn't even speak. I was giving you space. You left a note." Victoria tipped an eyebrow. "Would you prefer a monologue?" Harper rolled her eyes, came around the counter, and took Victoria's hand. "I prefer this," she said, sliding the ring onto Victoria's finger. Victoria blinked. "Is that a yes?" "That's a hell yes. Harper, you're mine. I'm yours, no cameras. No press, just you. Me, a vineyard that smells like wet earth. And the rest of our lives." Victoria kissed her so hard Harper dropped the espresso mug in her other hand. It shattered on the tile. Neither of them flinched. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Harper whispered, "That's your cue to propose back. By the way, you just said yes." "Why would I?" "Because I want to hear it from you." Victoria held her gaze for a long beat, then sank to one knee. Barefoot, eyes bright. "Harper Lane, will you marry me?" "I already did." Harper grinned. "I want to hear it again." "Yes," Harper said. "Yes, yes, yes." They told no one. Not yet. The ring stayed on Victoria's hand like a secret, something too precious to share. Before they were ready, not hiding, holding close. Instead, they planned quietly. Not a wedding, a moment, a promise. Harper sketched ideas in her notebook. A ceremony beneath the vines, barefoot vows, no guests, no noise, just them. Victoria found a local violinist willing to play something soft and wordless. As they walked toward each other, they wrote their vows on opposite ends of the same page. They chose early May, just as the vineyard began to bloom. They didn't dress up. No gowns, no heels. Harper wore a linen dress with paint on the hem. Victoria wore a white button-down she hadn't ironed. They met between two rows, sunlight sifting through the leaves, feet warm against the earth. "You changed me," Victoria said, voice shaking. "Not with force, not with fear, but by showing me love isn't a loss of power. It's what gives it meaning." Harper took her hands. "I used to think I was too much, too loud, too impulsive. But you, God, Victoria, you loved me anyway. You made me feel not just enough, but necessary." Victoria's eyes brimmed. "We'll still fight. I know. I'll still be infuriating. That's your charm. But I'll never stop choosing you. Not once. Not ever." Same. They kissed. No priest. No paperwork. Just truth. Just them. Later they lay in the grass, fingers laced, the ring now on Harper's hand, too. As the sky went gold overhead, Victoria whispered, "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" Harper smirked. "Get in the car before I burn the city down." "Exactly. Still could." Victoria smiled. "Let's not. I like this life. So do I, under that sky, the same one that had watched them fight, fall, rebuild, and begin again." They understood there was nothing left to prove. They were home to each other. It had started with a mistake. A wrong car, a stranger's voice, a storm, mascara running, sarcasm, soaked heels, and a woman who never asked to be seen, but was. And now, months later, it ended exactly where it had always been heading. Not in chaos, not in flight, in quiet, in permanence, in peace. Harper woke to the scent of lavender. Not candles, not oils, not a curated hotel perfume, just the breeze through the open window and the fields beyond, the vineyard, blooming wild in the spring light. She stretched, reaching across the bed to find Victoria already gone, the sheets warm but empty. She smiled, not because she missed her, but because she knew exactly where she was, downstairs, barefoot, coffee in hand, probably reading in the patch of sun near the doorway like she always did. Harper patted down slowly, the ring on her finger catching and her messy curls as she ran a hand through her hair. Victoria looked up as she entered, a soft smile already waiting. "Good morning, wife," Victoria said, the word sliding from her tongue like it belonged there. Harper rolled her eyes playfully. "You've said that every day for the past 2 weeks, and I plan to say it every day for the next 70 years. Harper crossed the room, kissed the top of her head. "Better make it 80. Victoria caught her wrist and pulled her into her lap. "You'll get bored of me by then." "Never. You still confuse me, frustrate me, make me want to kiss you, and kill you in the same breath. That's longevity, baby." Victoria laughed. "You still threaten to burn the city down when they're out of oat milk, because civilization is fragile, and I am passionate and dramatic and yours." Victoria's smile dimmed into something quieter, more reverent. "Always." Later, they walked the vineyard together, fingers intertwined. Harper barefoot in the dirt because she said it helped her connect to the grape energy. Victoria said she was insane. Harper said she was married to that insanity. They kissed between the vines, sat on the edge of the hill, talked about everything and nothing. "Do you regret any of it?" Harper asked. "What? Loving you? No. Letting them see it. The gallery, the articles, the chaos." Victoria thought for a moment, then said, "Not once. Because without all of that, I wouldn't have you like this. You're not mine in secret. You're mine in sunlight. Even when it's messy, especially then." Harper leaned into her. "I used to think love was supposed to be smooth, effortless, easy. It's none of those things. No, but I wouldn't want it to be. I want the friction, the fire. The mornings when we fight over stupid things and still fall asleep wrapped around each other like idiots. I want the life we've built with its rough edges and all." That night, they invited a few close friends over for dinner. Just 6 people, no press, no fanfare. June from the gallery, Annika from the Berlin Museum, Zara, Harper's sister, two of Victoria's oldest employees who now referred to Harper as the boss behind the boss. The dinner was warm and chaotic and perfect. Laughter echoed through the vines. Wine flowed like water. Harper stood barefoot on a chair and toasted Victoria with a glass of K and a speech. That was mostly insults and metaphors. Victoria kissed her quiet halfway through it. After everyone had gone, they sat on the porch, legs tangled, heads resting against each other. "You remember the first time you kissed me?" Harper asked. "You kissed me?" "Technicality. You said, and I quote, 'If you kiss me now, there's no going back.'" Victoria chuckled. "And you kiss me anyway. Wasn't really a choice." "No, it wasn't." Silence settled between them like a blanket. Not heavy, not filled with things unsaid. Just warm, just them. "What happens now?" Harper asked softly. Victoria answered without hesitation. "We live. That's it. That's everything." The next morning, they woke before sunrise, made coffee, stood outside wrapped in one giant sweater, and watched the light climb the hills. Harper rested her head on Victoria's shoulder. "We should do something ridiculous today." Define ridiculous. Something that reminds us how far we've come. Like go back to where it started. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "You want to go back to the hotel?" "I want to steal a car. Pretend you're an Uber driver again. I want to relive that moment." Victoria smiled. "And what would I say this time?" Harper stepped back, hands on her hips. "You'd say, 'You're soaking my leather.'" Victoria laughed. "Still true. And I'd say, 'Just drive.' I'm one bad song away from setting this whole place on fire." Victoria crossed the distance, touched her cheek, "And then I'd look at you, mascara smudged, and everything, and I'd think, 'God, help me. I'm already hers.' And I'd think, 'What kind of Uber driver wears silk?' And I'd think she doesn't know who I am. And maybe that's the best part." Harper pulled her close and I'd still get in the car. Victoria kissed her and I'd still drive you home. The sun crusted over the hills. The vineyard woke up. Somewhere in the distance, birds took flight. And in the stillness of that perfect morning, two women stood on the porch of the life they had built. Messy, defiant, loud with love. Not by accident, not by mistake, but by choice every single day. If you enjoyed this content and would like to support the channel in a special way, tap the thanks button below, the one with the heart and $sign. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, helping me keep creating awesome videos for you.